Welcome back, students and young professionals in marketing and advertising. I'm so excited to be here for another episode of the BroxtenDigital Show. My name is Broxton Davis. I'm a performance media analyst at one of the top advertising agencies in the world, as well as the host of this show, the BroxtenDigital Show, which is my podcast where I bring some of the best, the greatest minds in marketing and advertising on, and ask them the questions that provide you guys with those actionable insights and advice that you need to either navigate your career, job hunt, early meetings with your new boss, you name it. The answers are here on this show. With that today, though, we've kind of been on a roll, like I've said before, with these guests. It's been so awesome getting to meet these people and bring them on and really get to learn about their experience, their stories, and just all the amazing insights and advice that they give you. It's crazy, even the stuff that I've implemented in my day to day just from having these conversations. But like I was saying for today, we have a really awesome guest. He brings a ton of unique experiences. I know we heard from Amy Tillman a couple weeks ago. This is actually Amy's CEO. So very important guy. He's the CEO of the GBP Experts, also a longstanding Google guy. He pretty much knows Google in and out very well, which I'm sure you'll get to see in this episode here, as well as a number one bestseller on Amazon. This guy's kind of done it all. Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Wetherall.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great to be here, Broxton. Appreciate you having me. Uh, Ready to get into it. Yeah,
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, if we want to just start, I think it would be good to just kind of, walk through just high level of your experience. Where did you kind of start out, Brad? And now how did that lead into, what you're doing today?
yeah, it's kind of wild actually. You could probably pick up on the accent right away. To save you guessing where I'm from, I'm actually from Australia originally. I moved out to the US in the year 2000, so the 26 years ago. Um, and I came out with basically just a suitcase and a surfboard under my arm, right? And it kind of like started a pretty crazy journey, from being a software developer directly out of college. I graduated college in Australia, came over to the US, had a couple of jobs as a software developer. It led me to start my own business. One of my customers at the time ended up being acquired by JP Morgan Chase, the bank. Um, and when the bank was doing their post-acquisition audit of what they actually bought, the company that they bought, they came across a software application that I had developed for them, loved it, and wanted to hire me to come out and continue developing that software under JP Morgan. They ended up hiring me away from my small consulting business, and I was working at JP Morgan for a while. I was at JP Morgan for about 6 years before I realized working for a bank was not really a lot of fun for a technology guy. Wanting to be super innovative. Banks aren't necessarily known for their innovation. Let me just put it that way. Um, and so yeah, I actually left JP Morgan and joined Google in 2013. And My first product at Google was Google Wallet. I obviously with the payments connection from JP Morgan, I started managing a few of the different payment products that was in the Google ecosystem. After about a year and a half, I ended up taking on the Google Business Profile product, which is in the Maps department over at Google. So Google Maps, specifically the business data on Maps. Um, I pretty much ran the Google Business Profile all the way through my tenure at Google, to leaving Google in 2014. And towards the end of my tenure there, I also took on some incremental responsibilities for Google Shopping, which is the shopping tab in search, which are responsible for a lot of product inventory, as well as Google Domains, which was Google as a registrar right up until the point that it was sold off to Squarespace. So I had those three areas of responsibility, and it's kind of been a pretty crazy journey, and I've come a long way from that bloke from Australia that came out with a suitcase and a surfboard, like just kind of like making my way through various elements of corporate America to, arguably one of the largest technology companies in the world, and being a senior leader in that space. has kind of given me a lot of the experience necessary, I think, to be very successful outside of Google. And so like now on the other side, you mentioned I wrote a book, number one best-selling author on Amazon. AI and the Future of Search is the name of that book, and it talks really about how the search industry has evolved, especially with the introduction of AI, and how AI is really kind of like revolutionizing what we know about search, and even the foundation of what Google was built on back in, like the early 2000s. This concept of 10 blue links, like and organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful. That's Google's mission statement, by the way. They kind of force every Googler to memorize it. Um, but they've kind of come a long way from that, and now it's less about organizing the world's information, and it's more about ingesting the world's information so that its AI can make up its own mind. So it's a very exciting time. I think that a lot of the leaders at Google will kind of liken the the shift that we're experiencing right now with AI to the shift that happened in the late 1990s into the 2000s with the introduction of the internet. And so it's kind of like a massive shift, that our generation gets to see twice. Like we get to see the introduction of the internet, we also get to see the introduction of AI, and those are crazy evolution for us. And so it's just fascinating to kind of monitor and to be a part of. And I see part of my responsibility, given the journey that I've been on in the last 25 years, is to try and help people navigate that change, and the book is intended to in part do that, but also kind of like give people some tips as to what you might need to do differently to adapt in a world of AI versus the old school SEO technology.
Yeah, no, I mean, what a cool story going from, like the guy with just the surfboard and the suitcase to all this crazy stuff
Yeah.
now. And I really think is an important point that, obviously you're a long ways out from where anybody listening to the show might be if they're sitting in that student or young professional role. But your attitude around AI and kind of the way, you bring it to the table is exactly how I think everybody should be doing it. Rather than, you can kind of suffer from information overload and it can be overwhelming and there's always new changes to keep up with. But rather than letting all that eat you up, you went ahead and just did your research, said, I'm going to figure this out. And then, did one even further and was like, I'm going to write a book so other people can figure this out. And I think if more people just had that mindset about things, we'd probably be living in a much more educated, just people wouldn't be as worried about this crazy AI thing. Cause I think, like you mentioned, it's not much different than these other crazy changes we've seen throughout the years. It's kind of inevitable. History repeats itself. So I think it's just awesome to hear your perspective on it and see how you went about it. That's kind of been my idea with this podcast is like rather than complain about how tough it is for young professionals right now, it's like let's do something that's going to make it better. So I love that. And then I know we talked a lot about the book there, and you're doing a ton of other cool stuff with your GVP Experts company. So I'd love to kind of hear about that too. How did you get that kind of going, and maybe when did you decide like I think I'm going to go in on my own thing here?
Yeah, it was. I kind of fell into it actually, right? So, like, when I left Google, I was really just trying to like plan my next move, my next change, in my career, and on one hand, I was kind of like looking at other leadership positions at Amazon and Apple and Microsoft as like Google level competitors, and while I was kind of contemplating that, I had a whole bunch of people reach out to me, and ask for advice, and ask to get assistance with some of the issues that they were experiencing. And when I was at Google, I used to get asked to speak at conferences, but Google's perspective on that was, "No, we don't do that." Right? Like Google doesn't like unless it's Google's own conference, like Google I/O or Google Marketing Live, some of the Google Next, the cloud conference. Unless it's Google's own thing, like they were very hesitant to kind of participate in other people's conferences. So there was demand for people to kind of like learn more about that space. You know, local SEO was really kind of like the industry that the Google Business Profile sits in. And so when I left Google, those restraints went away, and so a lot of these people are like, "Hey, now will you come talk at my conference and be on my podcast and do it?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, I will. Let's do it." Right. You know, and I love it. I love being able to talk about you know, like my experience, and I love being able to talk about you know, intended operation of the product. You know, when I was inside Google, I was watching a lot of people, you know, sit behind the steering wheel of a Ferrari and drive it backwards. And I'm like, dude, turn it around. You'll go so much faster, right? And so, but Google isn't very good at explaining their products. You know, I think that for the longest time they've had this philosophy that like, well, we design products that are so simple that you don't need an explanation. You can just use it, right? And I'm like, those people clearly haven't met my mum, right? So like that, she don't like it. So like she needs explanation. People need explanation, and so that gave me it gave me an opportunity to to be that voice and to explain the intended use of the product. And so after doing a couple of those speaking gigs, you know, like I realized there's a business here, right? Like people need help, you know, and so I created the GBP experts really for that reason, you know, and many of my clients in that industry were other agencies. So like, you know, I honestly don't consider myself to be a competitor to any digital marketing agency out there. I consider myself to be the hired gun, so to speak, right? So like if you know, I have a lot of clients that are agencies that will use us as a white labeled service, or will use us when they come across an issue or a complication that is too complex for them, and they're like, you know, like, and so that's kind of where, you know, I think that our brand has really come from, and the expertise that we provide, and so. So I kind of fell into the business, you know, because you know, the old age old supply and demand argument, right? Like, well, the demand was there, you know, and the more people that reached out, I'm like, you know, let's uh let's try it out. And you know, I tell my team, Amy, you had her on your podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I told Amy at an early stage that I'm like, look, I'm in a sell then build mindset right now, right? Like I'm not going to build anything until I know that we've got something to sell. You know, I also had a conversation with Amy about a week or two ago where I'm like, okay, we're selling, so now we have to build. We have to play a little bit of catch up, right? So it's a fun business, you know. I think that it's something that both Amy and I don't know a lot about. You know, Amy obviously is a diamond level GBP product expert, which is incredible. There's only 15 to 20 of those in the world. And so, you know, to have her on my staff is incredible. And between the two of us, it's just, you know, we've become a bit of a force in the industry, you know, like where there's not many people that you know, are able to rival our level of our ability to resolve issues between the two of us. So it's a great position of strength to be in. The GBP experts obviously helps with you know, we work with agencies, but we also work with individual businesses that might be experiencing issues. And it's just yeah, we've been able to do a lot of really good work in a short period of time, and you know, solve problems that other professionals have said is unable to be solved, right? And so that actually, you know, gives me a lot of energy when people say something can't be done. That's what I love. That I love proving them wrong. I love rolling up my sleeves, and I'm like, you know, hold my beer, here we go, let's get to work.
Yeah, that's so awesome. That kind of thing totally motivates me too. Like, I think that happens a decent amount. Maybe somebody doesn't want to do the work or just maybe doesn't even enjoy working with the business they're working with and says, you know, we can't do this. It's too complicated. You know, it
Yeah.
takes an expert like you to come in and, you know, solve that problem. And I think, you know, it just really speaks to the advertising and marketing industry as a whole is like, you really can pave your own way and make it whatever you want. But like one of the main ways to do it, I think, and you're a prime example of it, is like you have to get really good at something to where you are able to, provide that solution when everybody says this can't be done. Well, actually, being that I'm the expert and done stuff that nobody else has, it can be. So I think that's just like an important takeaway for the students and young professionals to realize is just like, pave your own way, but also, make sure you're really lasering in on a skill that one, you obviously love and are passionate about, but like two, you clearly are very good at what you do too. So like you need to have that if you want to get up to the area where you are, to even especially like where you want to start your own business. There's nobody you can blame it on, when you're the one running the business if something goes wrong. So
And the advantage that I think young professionals in the marketing industry have today is that AI has leveled the playing field, right? Because, like the whole, like, I've got 20 years of experience in this industry doesn't mean anything anymore because the industry isn't what it was 20 years ago. That knowledge is irrelevant, right? Like the industry is reinventing itself. And so the people that have the expertise are the people that are living in the here and now, right? Like if you're aware of what is happening in the marketing industry today, you are an expert, right? Because like what worked 20 years ago doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. And so that's I think that that's a really powerful message. And I think that like if you're in this industry, right? If you're in digital marketing as an industry, you kind of have to be a fan of kind of like the industry itself, right? Like and be interested in the ebbs and flows and how it's changing and how it's evolving. Otherwise, choose another industry, man, because this is a tough industry, right? Because of that fact, like Google is going to move the goalposts every 6 months, right? They're going to change the game. And so, like the young professional, that's an advantage for you right now because you need to be an expert now, right? And I think that the constant experimentation is just part of the expectation, right? Like we have to pay attention to what is changing. Like how is AI evolving? I'll give you a good example. So in December, Google released one of its core updates, and you for anyone who's following kind of like the marketing trends are probably familiar with Google pitching the EEAT philosophy, right? Like EEAT, I talk about this in my book as well. It's experience, expertise, trustworthiness, and authoritativeness, right? I switched A and T there, but that's essentially the four-letter acronym. And so basically in December, what Google did is they put a lot more focus of their search algorithm on the experience and the expertise part of the EEAT. And so what that told us as marketers is that like if you're writing content and you're publishing that content on your websites, the byline on your content has just become way more important than it used to be. So instead of writing a blog and not having that blog be attributed to anyone, now you'll want the name of the blog and you say, this was written by Brad Wetherall. And so not only will Google read the content of that blog article and grade it on how useful it is for its audience and whether it should be incorporated in AI results, it's also looking at who wrote the article. It's like, oh, who is Brad? What do I know about him? Oh, he's a ex-Google director, worked at Google for all right, he's got authority. I trust him more because I know who he is and the authority that he has. And so like little things like that is things that we need to pay attention to. And then we need to know, like, all right, what is best practice? Because, if our job is to try and invest in entity optimization where we're building up a brand, that brand could be a business, it could be a person, could be both. It's about what techniques do we need to do to make sure that we're feeding AI with the information that it is looking for. And as of December, the authority of the person writing the article or giving the speech or whatever has become more important than it used to be. So that's an example of how the trends and the techniques are changing over time, and how we need to make sure that only happened in December. Prior to that, it didn't really matter who was on the byline, but now it does. Right. And so like that's the type of thing that like if you're in the industry and you're paying attention, those are the things that are going to actually make you more successful in your area of expertise.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a really important takeaway for me and anybody listening is just that, like, if you're also a young professional and able to do that, when these changes happen, it's relevant to all the platforms we're going to be working within, whether, you're managing ads on Meta, doing Google search, doing SEO. This stuff changes all the time. They're constantly upgrading. Like Brad said, doing a bunch of experiments, testing, everything like that. If you're the young professional who can demystify and kind of bring peace when everybody's freaking out trying to get ads back live and stuff, and you can come in with, hey, I did a bunch of research. This is what happened. This is what we can change to cater to it. You kind of start to put a lot of value on yourself right there, because I mean, I've seen in the agency setting when a big change happens, it's kind of like fire drill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nuts, to give you another example, just this past weekend, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and sensory toys are really popular at a school right now, like Nidos and like little clickers and whatnot. So we have a 3D printer here, and we started making like little clickers, right? Like just like little novelty toys. And she's like, "Hey, Dad, like me and my two friends, we want to start a business selling these clickers." And I'm like, "You know what, Lorelei's her name." I'm like, "Great, let's do it." And I sat her down at my computer, and I'm like, "I'm going to have you build the website." Right, so I sat her down and we popped up Claude Code, right? So going into an AI tool, and I'm like, you have to give it all your requirements. What do you want to see? How do you want it to work, right? And within a couple hours, I think it only took us about 2 hours, we had a fully operational website up and running. Clickables.net, if you're interested, it's clickables with a K. Like, go check it out. You can buy my daughter's clickables on clickable.net. And it's like it's very impressive, and I was able to teach her how to use AI, how to work with it, how to prompt it correctly. Like I'm also teaching her business management skills because she's like, "Oh, I made $50. That's amazing." And I'm like, "Actually, there's a whole bunch of expenses that went into that, so you haven't made anything yet." So this is good. It's good business lessons, but like, like if my daughter who's 12 years old can build a website and launch a business in a weekend, right? Like think about the young professionals that are on the call and listening. It's like this is AI. AI is a game changer, right? It levels the playing field. And so, you were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I'm like, well, you don't have to understand how AI works to know how to use it, right? Just as like you don't need to know how an engine works to be able to drive a car, right? Like our job is to learn how to use the tools at our disposal. And so if you've never been playing around with some of these AI technologies, you need to start doing it right now, right? Like you need to really play around with it because it's look, my 12-year-old building a website in 2 hours is evidence of this fact, right? Like she never wrote a line of code in her life and still hasn't to this day, but she's been able to produce quality work, at the hands of AI. In fact, when AI was becoming more dominant in the marketplace, Google had all of its managers go through a training on AI. You can actually access the tool that we use. It's called Teachable Machine. You can Google it, and basically it's a machine learning system that will allow you to kind of like using your screen's camera to teach it what certain objects are. In the training, they had us like train it on like what different types of fruit were, and we had this is a banana, this is an apple, whatever. And then when you run the algorithm, you run it, and then you just put the fruit in front of the camera, and the algorithm will say, "I'm 98% sure that that's a banana or that's an apple or whatever." And like, and so I brought that home and I showed it to my daughters, and they can do it with like dance moves. And it's like, "Oh, I call this one the crow or whatever," right? And they just do these dance moves, and AI will identify what it is. And so the premise of that exercise is that like you don't need to be an engineer to know how AI works, right? Like you just need to know how to drive it. You need to know how to use it. And I think that's a great analogy. It was very powerful at the time when, people were hearing the buzzword of AI all over the place. And it's like, that's above my head, right? You know what I mean? It's like I don't know. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how it works. I think that the whole point of that study was you don't need to know. You just need to know how to drive it, right? You need to know how to work it. And so I think that's where, hopefully it becomes less scary, for the younger professionals, or even the older business owners that are scared of what AI is, because it's this new technology and it's very scary. You just got to learn how to drive it, and I think that the young professionals um, have that opportunity to become experts in AI, right? Like, everyone's starting at the same starting point. As I mentioned before, there's no like, oh, I've got 20 years experience in AI. I'll call on that because, like, how's that even possible? Right? Like, AI hasn't even really been a thing until the last few years, unless you're a data scientist and a data engineer, right? But like, that's not what people are looking for right now. They're looking for people who can leverage AI to yield a certain outcome, and that's what I would encourage you to focus on, right? And the book that I wrote is really about understanding how AI works in search, so that we can capitalize on that, right? Like, if we know what the recipe is, then we can fulfill that recipe and get the desired results. So I think that's kind of, understanding AI and knowing how to drive it, is going to be a really important investment for the younger generation, because I think that's going to differentiate you from your competitor, who is gonna, you can eat their lunch if you research, like, how AI is going to benefit you in the business place.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I even have seen it in my own personal life of like, you start to just upskill a little bit and you're able to maybe provide a quick solution to automate a task your manager's doing, or, present an AI use case to your team where you're saving them some time or helping them learn about a new tool they might not have known about. Like, we really do have the opportunity. And I'm so glad you said that. I think more stories like the one with your daughter getting out there and just,
Yeah.
people realizing that a 12-year-old can literally hop on Claude Code and start a website
Yeah.
where they're selling stuff, and pretty much being a full-on entrepreneur at the age of 12 is crazy, and it really, gets rid of anybody that, or gets rid of the ability to say, I'm scared of this, or it's too much information, or I can't do it. It's like, pick something, hop in, and get after it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it was, but Lorelai, my daughter, who's 12, I'm so proud of her, and she got hooked on it, and it's like, hey, it's not scary anymore. It's something that she produced something. She produced a website. She had AI create the logo. Like, it's just, when you get scared by things, like, I think that, take the heat out of it, like, do it, and you realize that it's really not that scary after all. And I think that, in fact, with AI, a lot of people will look at the fear factor of that and say things like AI is coming for our jobs. And maybe it is, but like, how do you make AI work for you? Right? That's another lens that you should be looking at it from. And I think the younger generation have that opportunity, right? Like, you're gonna come into the marketplace in a world where AI is being adopted, right? I mean, like, it gives you an advantage. You can be in the driver's seat. That's a huge, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. I think that last point is just like, it's huge for students. Is it's only going to continue to evolve, and like, you're kind of going to be expected to start coming into the industry with that baseline knowledge of it. So like, might as well hop on it now. I know like my senior year, if I would have really locked in on just understanding LLMs and getting really good at using them, I could have probably made my first couple months of my career go so much smoother and easier, and just, like you said, find ways to make it work for you. Nowadays, like, I'm even finding ways to just automate where if I'm doing something on my computer, I'm like, oh, I hate doing this. I hate, doing this order on BJ's Wholesale every time. And, hop in Claude Code and you can whip up a quick automation to give it a shopping list, and it adds everything to the cart for you. So it's just crazy. And I think it's so awesome that you could, bring that to the table of, hey, my 12-year-old daughter is doing it. You should be too. And that one other thing on that is your daughters are definitely going to be killers. Like, if they decide to go into the industry, they are going to be running
Yeah.
it up.
I hope so, like, I feel like my job is to just kind of guide them through that process, like, and I've been very disciplined. I can say it's it would have been easier for me to just kind of like take the keyboard and start doing it for them. But but I resisted, because I think it's a great opportunity, and I want them to be able to look at that and say I produced that. And so, it's cool. I'm having fun watching them and coaching them through that experience, but I do see them learning a lot, I didn't learn. No one really teaches you how to run a business, to be honest, right? Like that's not. I don't ever remember hearing, learning that in school, So this is it's a great opportunity, I think, and it's a great experience for me to have with my kids. So I'm all about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this show is all about, giving young professionals and students kind of the jump on the rest of the group. And like when I see most 12-year-olds, especially like at a restaurant or any kind of social setting, they're sitting there with their tablet watching a cartoon or playing some game. And, your 12-year-old's whipping up websites on Claude Code. I mean, talk about having the advantage on our peers. That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I know, very very impressive.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. To kind of switch gears here a little bit, I did want to talk about too, you had that long career at Google. You were at JP Morgan before that. And now you're, kind of doing your own thing in the entrepreneurship scene. I guess just, in the lens of the students and young professionals along that crazy career journey, I know we talked about, you definitely didn't expect it, I don't think, coming over here to America with just the surfboard and the suitcase to where you're at now. Where were maybe some of the points along the way, where you really did learn a lot or have like an unlock moment where it kind of helped you get to where you're at now? But, maybe at the time as the younger person, you just didn't really realize.
Yeah, great question, mate. I've got two examples come to mind. I think that the first example was, um, well, I think that when I started my own business, in the early 2000s, like it was what I learned through that exercise, I think, was how to make decisions. And the reason why is because up until that point, all of the professional, experience that I had had, as a junior person, like you enter the workforce, you can always ask people for help, or you have a boss. It's like, oh, what do I do in this situation, right? And they'll give you advice. I think that when I ended up creating my own business, um, th- there was no one to ask. I was the boss, right? Like there was no one to ask for advice. So like it was a very interesting part of my career development because I had to learn how to make decisions because I couldn't just say, oh, I have to ask my boss what he wants to do in this situation. I have to ask them for guidance. It's not my decision to make, it's their decision to make, right? And I think that, it was, dare I say, easier for a younger professional to just not have to worry about making the decision. It's like they'll tell me what to do and I'll just do it. Right? I am the execution leg of the business. I am not the thought leader part of the business. And I think what really set me on my path was learning how to make decisions. And like the spoiler alert to this is that no one ever really knows, right? You can only make the decision with the information that you have at your disposal, right? But you have to be confident enough to make a decision even when you don't know that it's the right answer, right? It's just it's uncomfortable to make the decision to be like, oh, should I do X or should I do Y? Someone's coming to me with a problem. How do I answer that question? How do I solve that problem for them? And most of the time, you don't know, right? It's just, well, what information do I have at my disposal, and then how do I give them guidance? And so for me as a leader, what I found is that it's more important for me to explain to my team, whether it be my managers or my lower level employees, the why behind a certain decision, right? So, like, here is my decision, and here is why I made that decision. And what I'm hoping to do is teach them the criteria that I used in making the decision. Now, the criteria might be wrong, the assumptions that I'm making might be incorrect, right? But like, there is some logic behind the decision that I'm making, and I'm not just randomly deciding, right? There is some level of information that I'm using to back that decision. And if you don't have the necessary information to make the decision, then it's your responsibility to go get it. Right, go get the information, ask that person, collect that thing to make the decision. So I think that the first piece of advice I would give is like learning how to make decisions is is one of the things that kind of set me on my path in my career. And you don't have to own your own business to practice this skill, right? I think that what you really need to do is the next time that you go to your boss, or you have a you're experiencing an issue where you have to make a decision. You can, maybe the decision is your boss's, but what I would recommend you do is go to your boss and say like, "Hey, here's the problem I'm experiencing. Here is what I recommend we do. What do you think?" Right? Like put yourself in the position of being the decision maker, of making the decision on which way you want to go, of solving that problem. And sometimes the your boss will come back and say, "No, I don't want you to do this for this reason." And it's like, great. Well, now you have more information. You didn't know the reason that the boss had, but now you can incorporate that in future decisions. And so then the next time you go to your boss and it's like, all right, here's a problem that I'm experiencing. Here is my recommended solution. What do you think? Your boss would be like, do it, 100%. Great. You do that a second time, you do it a third time. Now, all of a sudden, the boss is like, man, this guy is great. This guy or girl, like, I don't have to give them advice anymore. They've learned how to make decisions. You know what? I'm going to promote that person. I'm going to make that person, the leader of that department because I'm confident that when they encounter a particular problem, they're going to make an informed decision on how to resolve it, right? That's the initiative. And so learn how to make decisions, right? Like don't rely on other people. Was one of the big things in my career. And then the other thing in my career I think was just learning about um solving solving problems at scale. And I think that it's interesting when you work for small companies. Like you experience small problems, frankly, right? And it's just like, oh, there's this one particular customer that has this one issue. Let me solve that one problem, right? Fast forward to when I'm working at Google, right? I was responsible for 140 million businesses. We processed over 3 million support cases a year. Um, I'm not going to solve them one at a time, right? Like it's how do we scale how do we solve for the masses, right? And I think that this is an interesting principle that I was forced to apply at a company like Google because, like the scale in which we operate is just insane. And so, I had to look at issues as a representative example of 100,000 people or 1 million people or 100 million people. How many people are experiencing this issue? And so, solving problems at scale, like solving problems with technology and solving problems with process, right? Like those are kind of like, interesting ways to think about solving problems. And what I've been able to do successfully is take that philosophy out of the Google environment and into now I'm a small business owner, right? Like the GBP experts is a small business, but I'm able to apply the same philosophy. This is where running into a problem and it's like, oh, how do I solve this problem? Do I just solve that one problem for that one client? Or do I invest in the process so that I'm not only solving it for that one problem, but I'm solving it for any future client that experiences the same issue, right? Or maybe I learn something from a client that I can apply to all of my clients, right? And so, learning how to kind of like deploy solutions at scale and manage solutions at scale is also a very important skill and very marketable, right? Like because if you have that on your resume where it's like, I solved this problem that 10,000 people experienced, like or whatever it may be, that is something that businesses are looking for. They want people that are able to kind of like see big picture, right? That's another leadership trait. So being able to make decisions and being able to solve problems at scale and kind of like look through the individual issues to the more systemic challenges. Those are the two things that I think put together a really powerful recipe that will set you on a really strong career path and make you desirable from a lot of different companies.
Yeah, I mean, what great advice there, I mean, just, like, it's kind of insane for you to be able to take something that Google is pretty much, people call them a monopoly, they've turned themselves into such a huge company, be able to take something, their kind of method of doing things and, start to implement it in your own stuff, and obviously you've seen the gains there, so that's just so cool, and I think something that definitely I will be doing and any listeners I think should be doing, if you're working at a large company or even, like, a company that has success, look around you and see what's working and, how could you apply that later in life, and I'm sure, in the moment, when I asked the question, I was like, earlier in your career, you might not have realized. I bet in the moment when you were going through this stuff where you learn these skills, it probably seemed like chaos.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, at the time that you're going through it, it feels like the sky is falling. But and I have the benefit of hindsight to be able to look back on that, and I think that that's kind of where I'm like, well, what were the experiences that really helped shape my career and who I was as a leader, and I think those were two really important milestones, right? Like I think that had I not been forced to make my own decisions as a business owner, like I carried that even when I joined JP Morgan after selling my small business back to the other business partners and joining JP Morgan, where I was now just a manager, right? Like I was middle management in at JP Morgan, and I'm like, but I didn't behave like middle management. I behaved like I owned JP Morgan. I was an owner of that business because whenever I was asked to make a decision, I had that mindset. And so if you can approach the problem with that mindset, regardless of the business that you're in, that makes you desirable. That makes your boss want to promote you and want to lean on you. And you'll find yourself climbing the corporate ladder a lot faster if you can show those types of leadership characteristics.
Yeah, definitely. I've been recently reading Invaluable by Maya Grossman, and she talks about that a lot. Just, having that ownership mentality with everything you do, which can definitely be hard to do, especially, if you're working for a $1 billion company and you're just seeing your salary and you have, might not kind of know how what you're doing goes into the bigger picture. But if you can just show up every day with that ownership mentality, it really seems like the good stuff just starts compounding.
Yeah, and I mean, like a lot of the companies that are successful as well. I mean, I'll go back to Google as an example, right? Like they have, when I was there, I think they had five products that had over 1 billion monthly users, right? I think it's up higher than that now. I think there's like 9 or 10 products that Google has that has over 1 billion users, right? Insane volume, right? And so you ask yourself the question, well, how did they achieve that, right? Like, how did they get to a point where like they've got so much success in so many different areas of expertise, right? Different products, and the way that Google is structured, like organizationally, is that Sundar, the CEO, gives autonomy to each of these leaders to run it their own way. It's like you're responsible for Gmail, you're responsible for Photos, you're responsible for Android, you're responsible for Chrome. Go do what you want to do, right? And that's pretty wild, right? I mean, I think that it leads to good things and bad things. Let me get that straight, right? Because like that's how Google ends up with 6 different messaging apps at the same time, right? Like, and it's like, 3 different book reading apps, 2 different media apps like YouTube Music versus Play Music, like all in direct competition with each other. That's how that happens, is because the leader of Play was the different from the leader of YouTube, and they both developed their independent music streaming app, and then eventually they're like, all right, we need to consolidate. But the brilliance behind it is that each senior leader was given autonomy. Right, that's the good thing, right? Because that allows different parts of Google to build their products without being messed with, right? I think that once it gets to a certain level, then they start the integration and consolidation. But like they're trying not to interrupt innovation, and so that's kind of like it was an interesting learning exercise for even a company at Google scale, right? Like where it's like you're developing these apps independently, but you've got this big infrastructure surrounding you, and it was a really interesting lesson that like in spite of big corporate organizational structure with, like thousands of people working on it, you can still find ways to innovate and be relevant in the marketplace. And so that was a very cool lesson to observe.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's applicable to anybody in the industry too. If you're the young person, do the innovating. If you're the leadership person who, is in charge of these young people, let them do some innovating. I know
Right.
a lot of people probably heard that story you just said about Google and it made them grit their teeth a little bit. Like, being at that kind of level and saying, all right, go do your thing is, that really shows you have a lot of trust in somebody. So super
Exactly.
cool story. And I think insanely relevant. But anyways, with that though, I want to move into this next segment of the show. This is a rapid fire value segment where I'm just gonna rip some questions to you, and then first thing that comes to mind, try to keep it as short as possible, and just trying to provide some actionable insights that students can take today, tomorrow, next week, and start implementing right now. And whether it's helping them in their job search, navigate that early career, or maybe even help them they're a year in trying to figure out what to do, just that kind of vibe. So with that though, to kind of get started, I know you use a lot of tools in your day to day. So what right now would you say are 2 to 3 best free or low cost tools that are actually moving the needle
Oof.
for you?
Man, might have to go with categorical on this one because there's so many tools that I use. I think that the top of the list would have to be Claude Code. The top of the list, right? I think it's a tool, don't get me wrong, right? Like I think I agree that but today um you can build things that there are software as a service companies out there that are selling features, selling applications to do certain tasks. Um as business owners, we would often have this debate of build versus buy, right? Like it's like, do we build this thing internally? Do we go and find someone who has already solved this problem and buy it from them? And there was always a trade off, right? Because if you build it, it's always going to be better because it's custom to what you need. If you buy it, you're saving time and you get it right now, right? So the trade off between build versus buy was always a tough decision. Now with Claude Code, I think it's build over buy all the time because it's so easy to build stuff and build stuff that is high quality fast. So number one tool, Claude Code. Go play with it. You will be blown away at what you can do with it.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I've definitely been integrating that into my own personal life quite a bit more, and like literally bored on a random weeknight, and you can go and first thing that pops in your mind, try and build it, and you can build it pretty quickly. It's insane. So I definitely encourage people to do exactly what you're saying. Just if you don't have anything you think you could use it for, hop on and start playing around, and I bet you'll start
Yeah.
finding use cases just by doing that.
And you don't have to be a developer. You don't have to know software programming to use it. Go play with it and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I failed CSE 102 at MSU, so definitely not a coder, but I can whip up some pretty crazy stuff on Claude Code. So next one though, I know this gets talked about a ton when you're a young professional or a student, but sometimes it can just be kind of hard to understand and like figure out how you can actually use it for yourself. I want to talk about some soft skills and hard skills. So to start, what would you say right now, if you're a student or young professional in marketing or advertising, is the number one soft skill that you should really be making sure you're developing?
Oh, customer service, like I think the ability to communicate and the behavior of communication, right? Like responding to emails, things like that, simple stuff, right? I think that, like with AI is never going to replace human connection, right? And I think that you need to become more comfortable with communicating. And that doesn't mean get on the phone with everybody. I know that, a lot of the younger generation is all about texting and less about phone calls. And I'm cool with that. I don't need a phone call. I very rarely answer my phone because I'm usually in meetings when it rings. But like responsiveness is more important than the form factor of the communication, right? Like replying to email and learning how to communicate effectively, right? And if you don't, then the answer to my first question will help you, right? So then you can use Claude to develop responses that, you can tell someone to bugger off, but do it nicely. Just drop that into Claude and it'll tell you, right? So it's yeah, like just the customer service is always going to be a critical factor. Whether you're using it internally or externally, it doesn't really matter. But like customer service with your stakeholders, with your boss, with your clients if you are externally facing. But customer service and communication skills would be the number one soft skill.
Yeah, and I'm happy you didn't just say communication and said customer service because that really is just the reality of it, especially as a young professional. Whether you're, meeting with your manager, talking with a client, talking with a mentor who's gonna, is taking their time to help you out. Really, you're practicing customer service. You need to bring that smile, bring that energy, and if somebody's helping you, or if you're talking to somebody who's gonna help you move up, you better have it, or your name's not gonna get considered in those conversations. Now, to kind of flip it on the opposite side of the spectrum, what would you say is the number one hard skill right now that students, young professionals should be doing should be, lasering in on to just stand out against the rest?
Well, it's a great question. I think that for our industry, right? Like for the digital marketing space, I think that it's about having experience with experimentation, right? I think that it's less about getting a degree or anything like that. I think that I used to have a lot of junior people that were like we would hire people fresh out of college at Google, and they would come to me and they're like, "Oh, do I have to go back to school and get my MBA?" And my response to them was, "Well, what do you want it for?" Right? I'm like, um, if you want to change your career, then an MBA might be a good fit for you because the benefit of getting an MBA is you learn a little bit of everything, right? You learn the economics, you learn marketing, you learn product, you learn engineering, you learn all the elements of what it takes to be a CEO and to run a business, right? But if you have no desire to change career and you're like, hey, I'm all in on marketing, I have a marketing degree or whatever, that's the thing that I want to do, then there's no point in getting in. Like what you would be better off doing is getting more experience in that field. And the experience that I'm talking about too isn't because I kind of talked a little bit about this earlier. It's not about like, oh, I've got 20 years of experience of marketing. Like today, that means nothing because you don't have 20 years of AI experience because AI didn't exist 20 years ago. So it's about experimentation and it's about like, what have you been able to, what is a hypothesis that you've had? How have you proven that hypothesis? How do you learn about the process of finding an answer where like or doing a market study. Those I think are the hard skills that employers are going to look at and being like, hey, that is interesting. You had this idea, you went out, you tested it. Even a negative result in an experiment is still valuable. It means I don't need to do that. I tried it and it failed. Cool. Mark it off your list of something we should not do, right? That's still valuable information. So experimenting, and even a success, even a failure can be a success when you're experimenting. So I think that's probably the hard skill that I would be looking for is how much experience you've had in working on projects and then the outcome and the learnings from that project. Whether the outcome is good or bad, it's irrelevant to me. The what is more important is how you went about it, right? Like you went about it and the outcome was positive, negative, doesn't really matter what the outcome was, is what did you learn from it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it goes back to that extreme ownership piece that we were talking about earlier. If you're a business owner, you want to know the things not to do just as much as you want to know the things that you should be doing. So, if you can
Absolutely.
kind of implement that as a young professional and be the one, whether you're finding out what not to do or what to do, that's valuable. Somebody else
Yes.
wasn't going to do it for you. So, bring that to the table. I totally see the value there. To kind of switch it up a little bit, I know we talked about tools, but let's talk about learning resources. What would you say right now would be the number one free or low cost learning resource that you'd recommend to students or young professionals?
Ooh, learning resource. Um, I'll be honest with you, I actually don't use a lot of learning resources. I learn by doing, right? I think that I read industry. websites and whatnot. So I try to pay attention to the industry, so that it's like, hey, I tried this thing and it had this outcome, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right? Like, so I'm kind of keeping track of what's happening in the space, but and maybe that is my learning resource. Maybe it's LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is probably my number one learning resource. In fact, if I think about it from that perspective, because I follow industry leaders and people that I respect, and they constantly feed little bits of information, which are very digestible, and it gets me thinking. I love, actually, it's going to sound weird, I like Instagram, right? Like, as a learning opportunity as well. I like, bite-sized chunks of information where I can learn, oh, this is something new. I haven't thought about that. It gets me thinking, but then beyond that, then it's really about like, going back to experimentation. Then it's about trying things and learning it by doing. So I think that's kind of, Instagram, LinkedIn are probably my two number one learning locations, followed by just getting your hands dirty. Like, I didn't know anything about Claude Code, and then I just started using it, and now I'm like, damn, this thing is powerful, right? Like, and now, I'm doing advanced things through that platform just because I've spent enough time with it, right? Like, and I, and that's the other thing that I've learned too, is that, like, if I try something out and it doesn't provide value, or then I move on. Like, I get bored with it and I bounce. But Claude is one of those sticky ones where I'm like, oh, there is a tremendous amount of value in this. So I now learn more about that product because it's giving me a lot more return.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point because like you really can spend all day, learning, watching YouTube videos, signing up for courses, going to webinars. There's so many resources out there. But the other side of that is you do have to take action on it. You have to know when, all right, I got a good idea. Like, let's go figure it out. And I think you kind of nailed it perfectly with how you could do it. How many Claude Code videos are you gonna watch before you, bite the bullet on the $17 a month subscription and test it out for a month and see what you can come up with? So that's such a great point, and I think just is a great idea for young professionals and students to, not get paralysis analysis and go out and do the stuff you're thinking about and learning about. Now this is the last one I got for you for the rapid fire value segment, and I hope it doesn't make anybody mad or anything, but who would you say are the top two people that all students and young professionals should be connecting and interacting with on LinkedIn right now?
Ooh. Um, I mean, it's industry specific, I would say. I think that, I don't think I would have the same answer, for the different industries, and I think that, it kind of depends. I think that if you're in um, I mean, digital marketing is a pretty, there's a lot of different avenues there, right? And I think that, uh, I've spoken at a bunch of SEO conferences, and I speak in the local SEO track, right? Which is kind of like, that's where Google Business Profile as a product, it kind of sits in local SEO. Then there's like organic SEO, then there's paid ads, right? Like, and things like that. And for full transparency, like, I don't know a lot about ads because Google keeps ads and search intentionally separate, right? Like, they never want anyone, they don't want anyone to get the perception that if you're an advertiser, you get preferential treatment in search, because that is one, not true, and two, they work very hard to protect that because that is not the way that it works. And so, as a result of that, I worked for over a decade in search, know very little about ads, right? Because, like, we just never crossed paths. So using that as an example, look, I really think, Will Reynolds, on LinkedIn, in the marketing space, is kind of a must follow. He's constantly, I talk about experimentation, right? He is constantly experimenting. I actually presented right after him at Brighton SEO last year. I sat next to him, we were kind of like co-speakers, and he was telling me about all this stuff that he was developing, and I'm like, blew my mind. And so I think that he would be, a great bloke to follow. Is definitely a leader in that space. I also really like Joy Hawkins, from Sterling Sky. Joy's a friend of mine. I'm actually going to be on her podcast next week, and it's she is a leader in the local SEO space. Is able shares a lot of new insights around local SEO. And she's just a lovely person as well. So like I like working with good people. And yeah, so they'll probably be my two standouts for who I would follow, at least in this industry. But as I mentioned, my recommendations are likely going to be industry specific. So find the authorities in your space, and yeah, like find and also find someone that you can connect with. Like ideal wise, right? Like, oh, I agree with what this person is saying. And I think that would be the right person. And of course, if you ever want to reach out to me, have at it. I love having more people, more to connect with on LinkedIn and learning about what's happening in the industry. So,
Yeah, that's awesome, and, thanks for offering that up to everybody listening. That's so huge to be able to reach out to somebody, who's, technically sitting in the C-suite of this industry, and if you're somebody trying to learn about it, what a great person to be able to reach out to, and then Will and Joy both also great people to follow on LinkedIn. I followed Joy for a long time since college. I got put onto her content and stuff. And some of the stuff I've learned just from following her, like, I worked with some freelance clients in college and her live that she does, I get so many great takeaways from and be able to actually, implement it and use it to help me make some money with a freelance client is it's pretty crazy. So it just goes to show, those people are out there, and also a great point on, what industry you're in, whether you're in paid search, paid social, programmatic. Find the people who are killing it in your industry and start interacting with them. Like, they're not going to get mad because a young professional is commenting on their post or, bringing a
no,
new idea to their post.
it,
If anything, I would
it's
say,
the opposite. Yeah,
right.
I mean, speaking for myself, like I get a lot of energy from that. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you guys are putting it out there for is, to help teach people. And, you obviously want that interaction too. So I would say just, put yourself out there if you're somebody who's listening to maybe some people that you normally would be intimidated to do it with. That kind of wraps up our rapid fire value segment, though, Brad. That was some awesome advice. I mean, if anything, if you're still listening here, take those last 10, 15 minutes and, take the couple things Brad says and start doing them on your day to day. And I really think you'll start seeing a change. I know I had some great takeaways just listening. So, if you really think deeply about this stuff and start thinking of ways you can take this advice and implement it into your own life, I mean, it could be a game changer. Like Brad said, those moments when, you learn to make decisions, when you learn to do certain things that might seem hard in the moment, those are the ones that end up, propelling you to doing the crazy stuff in your career. So I would definitely say, take Brad's advice and take action on what he's saying. But to kind of close out here, I know Brad Wetherall on LinkedIn, and then I definitely want to hear a little bit more about the book, what the kind of details are on that. And,
Yeah.
is Amazon still the best spot to find that one?
Yeah, yep. You can buy it at Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Here it is. Here's a copy of it for those of you that are watching the webinar. It's called AI and the Future of Search. I talk. It's a pretty easy read. It's only about like 120 pages or something like that. But it really does break down what is changing in the industry. I have 5 core chapters on various elements that I would recommend you investing in, and those elements are your website and making sure that it's technically ready, right? Like with the right schema and is able to be read by machines as well as humans. Content, right? Make sure that you've got the right content strategy. Your Google business profile is uniquely positioned because it's a way for you to inject information directly into Gemini, right? When you have the ability to insert information directly into Google's databases, you should take advantage of that. And those 3 are the things that you have control over, like regarding your business. The last 2 is reputation. So like reviews, whether it be on the Google platform, Yelp, or any industry specific directory. So managing your reputation. And the last one is public relations and brand development, and that's really about getting your name out there. And so, as you just saw, the top 3 is about things that you have control over and what you say about yourself. The last 2 is what other people are saying about you, like in reviews and brand mentions. So that's the combination that is going to get you found in AI and in search. And the book will go into a lot more detail onto the techniques of flicking those levers and making sure that you can influence what AI knows about you, because if you're not taking control of your brand, then your brand ends up becoming whatever AI says it is. And so you really need to take control of that.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah,
a great way
hopefully
to
you
put
get
it.
yeah. So hopefully you get value out of the book. It was a fun experience to write, and if you read it and you like it, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to engage with you and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how cool. Like I said earlier, like just having the attitude of diagnosing a problem and then actually putting something out there to help other people solve it is just so cool. So I would definitely recommend that anybody listening, read that book, reach out to Brad. Who knows what you'll learn or what opportunities you'll stumble upon. But that was just so cool. And, the other side of that too, Brad, it was such a cool experience getting to have you on the show today. You bring such a unique perspective and have some really awesome ideas and just like, I think some killer insights and takeaways from this episode. So thank you so much for your time. I know, you're running a business, doing all sorts of stuff. So thank you for making the time for this. And, it was a pleasure getting to interview you.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, I think that right now, this new clickables.net business is taking up most of my time, because my daughter is on my ass about like wanting to kind of build new features. So I like to chuckle about that. So I'm not. She's the CEO of that business though, so I'm just an employee, I guess. But no. All joking aside, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciated the discussion. And as you mentioned, if any of your audience wants to connect on LinkedIn, just hit me up. You just find Brad Wetherall and reach out. That'd be great.
Heck yeah. And if you're somebody who needs to figure out your Google business profile, also a great guy to reach out to. But with that, that wraps the episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening. It's always a pleasure getting to bring this information to everybody. And yeah, until the next time.
Awesome. Thank you.